Hi, welcome to the California CDAR sponsored Communities of Practice series. CDAR, which stands for Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform, is a national center based at the University of Florida and has a mission to support students with disabilities in achieving college and career-ready standards. For those wanting to know more, please visit cedar.org. That's CEEDAR.org. This webinar series aims to share information that supports educator preparation programs in redesign efforts grounded in inclusive practice. The topics include teacher performance assessment, preparation and requirements, traumatic brain injury, extensive support needs and inclusion, and dyslexia. And we have more topics coming soon. We hope you find the information and resources helpful. So first I want to say welcome and thanks everyone for coming. This is our second Community of Practice Brown Bag Lunch meeting. We are going to be covering the CalTPA today, and we are looking forward to this. Before we went into that, I just wanted to mention that this Community of Practice meeting is made possible because of a grant from the CDAR institution, CDAR California, and I'm going to put the link to this this website here. For those of you who want to know more about the CDAR Center, there are a number of wonderful resources that they have. This is their main website. You can see here that California is one of the states who are involved in CDAR, and we are very fortunate to be part of them. And on this main website, there's a lot of resources for teacher educator programs to use, including their innovation configurations, course enhancement modules, and their high leverage practices resource page. So I do encourage people to have a look at that when you have a chance to do so. But in the meantime, I am going to turn it over to my cohort colleague, Virginia Kennedy, who is going to take it from here and
okay.
Started.
Good morning and welcome everybody. So good to see you. This is a hot topic. Yes, we did have to make a rescheduling change for Lori Kroger from CalTPA, and so she will be presenting in late August. We haven't actually set the date yet. So and that will be about the CalTPA, as I said. So today we are very, very fortunate to have James Webb from CTC, and he is part of the performance assessment team. You have probably met him or seen his face in many different ways, starting with those meetings that he and Amy Rising had around the state about CalTPA back when it was a glimmer in people's heads, or eyes, and following through for actually establishing it as something that we can use now in our new, okay, sorry. So that's something that you can use in your programs as we have redesigned and are launching our new Ed Specialist credential programs. I wanted to say a few words about these Community of Practice meetings. So we've already had one. Many of you were there, and it was on TBI, traumatic brain injury, since we know that, yes, that is an area that now crosses over between mild, moderate, and extensive support needs, and many of us needed more knowledge about that. So in our so that was an area of great interest, and that has been recorded. The recording will, the link will be sent out to everybody who participated there, but also we're making it available on the Cal Council for Teacher Education YouTube channel. So we'll let you know when that happens officially as well. There will be 4 more meetings of this Community of Practice. They'll be in the fall, late August, and then going into the fall. And so one will be at TPA, One will be on bilingual literacy for students with mild, moderate, and intensive support needs. And then we have a few others in the hopper that we will certainly make you know about as we go. As you're coming in, if you would please put your name and your affiliation, if you'd like to, in the chat, then we could see who is here. And we'd love to do that. So without further ado, and I need to let you know that we are recording this. All the community practice sessions will be recorded. So we just need you to know that, as Anne just mentioned. Okay. All right. Good morning, James. We're so happy you're here. Folks can put questions in the chat and in the queue. We're using the chat for questions, and then there will be pauses that James will take to answer questions. If there are burning questions along the way, Anne and I will direct them to James' attention. Okay. All right. Thank you, James. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for letting me be here. I am very excited to be sharing this information. As was indicated earlier, I am going to be presenting information about the education specialist, CalTPA, which is the Commission's model for both MMSN and ESN teaching performance assessment. It was approved at the Commission meeting on June 16th, so about 2 weeks ago. And I will just be presenting the information as it pertains to the education specialist CalTPA. If you have attended some of our technical webinars or other information, you may see a slight repeat of information, but what will make this a little bit different is that I am here to answer any questions that you may have about the upcoming operational administration, which, as you know, begins tomorrow. So any of your candidates who are enrolled after tomorrow or who are pursuing the new credential for MMSN, ESN, they will be held to the requirement of a TPA. Just as a reminder, the lower incident areas of early childhood special education, DHH and VI, do have an additional year. So those programs will not be held to a teaching performance assessment until beginning the 23-24 academic year. So next year, our lower incident areas will be field testing those three areas. So as Virginia and Anne explained, I am with the performance assessment development team, and we are housed in the professional services division of the Commission. And I have been with the commissions for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was an induction director for both the teacher and administrator induction program and taught for about 25 years in the classroom. And so I have a lot of expertise from the classroom, but also with my experience as an induction director, I was very excited to bring that to this work with the development of the performance assessment for education specialists. I wanted to just show you what I plan to cover for today. I want to just give a very brief background and history of where we have come from and what developed in terms of requiring a performance assessment for education specialist candidates. I also wanted to talk about the design team goals and commission objectives in the creation of the commission's model. Then I'm going to actually go into just very briefly and a high-level overview of the instructional cycles that were approved by the Commission 2 weeks ago for both MMSN and ESN. Talk a little bit about what is the same, but also what are some differences with the two instructional cycles. We'll talk about scoring and what are the minimum passing scores that were established by the Commission. Put in a plug to see if any of you would like to become an assessor for this important work when we get our first batch of submissions in later this year. and I'll take some final questions, and then we'll have closure with the presentation. I am going to have Anne and Virginia monitor the chat for me. If a question comes in that is really burning to the topic that I'm presenting, I, of course, am more than happy to take that, but I have put in question items throughout the presentation so that we can pause and take a question or a comment when we are presenting on that particular area. So what I always like to do is start with the task force report that was published in 2015, because that's really where all of the momentum started with the reevaluation of the education specialist teaching performance expectations, as well as the program standards. And so if you are familiar with this task force report, that was a joint venture between the CTC and the California Department of Education. Remember that it established the common trunk or universal TPEs for both general education and special education, stating that teachers were teachers of all students and therefore needed to understand the universal TPEs as well as the credential specific. There were recommendations made to the programs, which are listed here, particularly that I'd like to call out because they are in the Ed Specialist CalTPA, UDL, MTSS, and an emphasis on SEL, social emotional learning, looking at response to intervention, looking at data to monitor student progress and inform instruction, evidence-based reading instruction, and now that is going to be even more fleshed out with our literacy SB 488 that was also presented to the commission in June, but looking forward to what will eventually replace RICA in 2025, and looking at digital literacy and instructional technology, and that emphasis on the inclusion of educational technology for students. It also identified that teacher candidates needed to know how to support the needs of all students, but also looking at the special authorizations for early childhood, special ed, DHH, and VI, which of course we have in our lower incident areas. The next set of recommendations were that SPED teachers should be able to provide instruction and support to gen ed students. We are seeing that in the creation of co-facilitation or inclusion classrooms. Here in the district in which I am housed, I'm actually in Southern California. We have a number of our high schools at the obviously at the secondary level, where we have core courses such as biology, algebra 1, in which it is taught or co-taught by a education specialist teacher as well as a gen ed teacher, and looking at that model so that students are provided with a number of supports, especially in the MMSN areas. SPED teachers should be provided with by their programs with in-depth knowledge of how to support students who struggle with learning, looking at behavioral disorders, physical disabilities, and healthcare needs. The authorization statements are changing for the mild to moderate support needs and extensive support needs. Your mention about traumatic brain injury or TBI from your first community of practice is definitely an area that has now been included in the authorization statements. The authorization statements look more at a system of supports for students as opposed to a placement. And so there could be situations where students, depending on the level or severity of their disability or what needs that they are requiring, and that is how the new credentials will be able to serve the students. Remember, or just a refresher, MMSN and ESN are almost identical. The main difference is that in ESN, we have the inclusion of deaf blindness in that particular authorization statement. And as a reminder, the authorization statements have been codified and have been accepted by the Office of Administrative Law. So they are, of course, coming online tomorrow. So a lot going on tomorrow with regard to these new credentials. And then finally, the last recommendations was that teacher candidates should be trained in assistive technologies, augmentative and alternative communication systems, and the critical transitions for students. And so as a result, we stated before that teachers are teachers of all students, and that does include general education teachers as well. And so the idea is that we are wanting to bridge the gap that students have been faced where they have been denied certain programs or the ability to pursue a diploma. And so we are trying to encourage there to be more inclusion of general education in the career, in the teaching or educational careers of these students. And so when we look at this common trunk, we see how the idea is the universal TPEs, and then Gen Ed branches off into multiple subject and single subject. And then we have the 5 credential areas in special education. Remember that we had 7, now we are down to 5. And the 5 that are identified are mild to moderate support needs, extensive support needs, DHH, VI, and early childhood special education. Again, to help with that transition to more inclusion and participation in general education courses. So with all of this information, the design team was created or commissioned by the executive director of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. I don't know, Anne or Virginia, if Vicki has joined us, Vicki Graff. She was our, not yet, okay. She was our technical advisor that served with the commission. And so she was instrumental in helping us with understanding what the field needed and what the field was saying. And so from the task force report, along with some other information, the design team really took upon itself to create a performance assessment that would be able to capture those universal TPEs as well as the credential specific. And when we take a look at, you will see that, yes, there are several elements borrowed from the general education CalTPA, but that is intentional in order for candidates to have a rich understanding of what role they will play as an education specialist in today's schools. So just looking at very briefly where we were, we developed our assessment over a 2.5-year period. We had our last design team meeting for our MMSN and ESN on June the 14th. And then we had our presentation to the commission on the 16th. And so we have pilot tested both cycles in both credential areas, field tested both, have taken all of the information from our candidates, our coordinators, and our assessors, including our bias review committee. So this assessment did not just get thought up one day on a whiteboard and then thrown out and said, okay, well, let's see what happens. It actually went through a number of different iterations, and I'm currently working on the information that we're bringing even forward from the field test as we are getting ready for the operational materials that will be available to those programs who are using the Ed Specialist CalTPA for their performance assessment selection. As I said, we are down now to operational administration. We do say October, even though the requirement is beginning tomorrow, because candidates obviously are not going to be engaging in a performance assessment tomorrow. They will go through coursework or however your program has decided to move forward with that in order to be able to give the candidates adequate time to prepare. So at that point, any questions about where we came from, what the design team had in its mind for developing the cycles or the MMSN or ESN performance assessment? So Anne, I believe you're monitoring the chat, see if there are any questions.
There's nothing in the chat yet, but people can feel free to unmute and ask questions or type their questions. Here comes a question. What were the 2 areas in special education that were cut out?
The 2 areas that were cut out. Oh, from this 5, now I understand that question. The orthopedic impairment credential was taken out. And also there was another one, and forgive me if I get it incorrect, it was something about other health needs, or it was something of that nature.
Oh, other health impairment?
Thank you, other health impairments.
So
OHI.
is it a shift in language and combining, or is it actually getting rid of like that eligibility? Or
what it's trying to do is it's trying to be more in line with IDEA, but also to eliminate the idea of placing a student somewhere and that they never exit from a particular program, but also looking at what is the student's primary disability. Is their disability, for example, if they have a health impairment, does that health impairment count as their primary or their secondary disability, so that you have an understanding of what the student's main need for support is?
So James, I've got, I think 2 comments. I had one person say that what was cut out was PHI, physical health impairments, and RSP. Somebody else said physical health impairments and LAD, language and academic development, were what was removed. And then I have a question that I'm not sure whether or not you'll be able to answer. The question is, what is the main difference between the CalTPA and the EdTPA? What are the advantages of either?
Well, with regard to the credential areas, that could be right. Since my expertise is more in performance assessment, I try to be as understanding as I can be with regard to the way that they shifted from the 7 to the 5, but that does sound correct. With regard to the advantages or disadvantages of the performance assessments, that's not really something that I can speak to, nor is it something that I have expertise in. It really has to depend on what your program decides it wants to offer to its candidates. It's hard to really say right now because the EdTPA has not been formally approved by the commission. It still has to go through all of the same technical reviews. They have to look at the TPEs that are measured. It has to go up against the assessment design standards, and it has to be presented to the commissioners for their approval. So I really can't speak to that because I don't know if the commission, it's hard to speak for 19 people and what they're going to recommend or what they're going to ask to see more of.
That's all the questions I have. Thanks, James.
Okay, no problem. So I'll go ahead and continue, and then if anything comes up, we can certainly take time to respond to that. So what I wanted to do now is just talk a little bit about what are the instructional cycles as they look at for both MMSN and ESN. Remember that I will be getting into a little bit later what are some differences, but you'll notice that in the 2 instructional cycles that are meant to be embedded throughout the program, you as a program will take a determination of when you would introduce, when you would allow candidates to have practice, and then when their submissions would be uploaded. But instructional cycle 1 for both MMSN and ESN looks at candidates learning about their students with IEPs and planning instruction. And so in both of the credential areas of emphasis, they'll go through the plan, teach and assess, reflect and apply, where they will select 3 students from their caseload, and they will plan a content-based lesson using the current grade level standards. They will then teach that particular lesson and video record themselves and annotate their videos. They will then reflect on the efficacy of their lesson as they were teaching it, thinking back to their planning, and then apply any new knowledge that they would like to take forward. You'll notice that this plan, teach, and assess, reflect, and apply, if you have experience with the general education CalTPA, you'll notice that that same system appears in the Gen Ed CalTPA. And again, that was a intentional design for the design team because it really shows what the universal TPEs are in terms of the base of the credential. In instructional cycle 2, assessment-driven instructions for students with IEPs. Again, the same cycle of plan, teach, and assess, reflect, and apply. Candidates in cycle 2 actually do a 3 to 5 lesson segment, and they include models for informal, self, and formal assessment that they demonstrate in step 2, the teach and assess. They reflect in cycle 2 on how students performed on the formal assessment, looking back to the informal and self. And then they think about in the apply if they need to reteach or if they need to extend that content for students. And so they look at their data. Remember, that was something that was put forward in the task force report. And then also in cycle 2, they think about ways that they can communicate the assessment information to parents as they are helping keep families apprised of students in their progression towards IEP goals or other areas of need. And so, as I said, the instructional cycles, the titles are exactly the same for both MMSN and ESN, but there are some slight differences that I'll go over again a little bit later. Good news is we have the materials available for planning purposes only. I am going to put into the chat the way that you can access this information so that if you would like to be able to look at the field test materials that were used for both cycle 1 and cycle 2 for MMSN and ESN, you'll be able to do that. However, if you are going to engage in the Ed Specialist CalTPA, you'll be able to see the watermark draft assessment guides that will include both the directions and the rubrics. They will be available August 31st of 2022. What I'm going to do on that date is I will be having an operational administration webinar. You can sign up for that through the PSD e-news. The link has been advertised for a number of weeks. And then in October, we will do the registration and submissions systems webinar. So that will be the operational launch. And we will hold that in October of 2022. And again, the registration for that will be available in the PSD e-news. Anne, I see you've raised your hand. Go ahead and
there's a couple of questions in the chat that I think might be relevant. One is,
okay.
I think the answer to this is going to be no, but you may know. There was a question asked, if we choose the Ed TPA, then do we get to postpone implementation?
No.
That was my understanding as well. And then there's another question. My understanding is that if a candidate is concurrently pursuing both MMSN and ESN credentials, that they would need to complete the TPA for ESN. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that question again?
I can.
Sorry.
There's a question that their understanding is for a candidate who is pursuing both the MMSN credential and the ESN credential, they would need to complete the TPA for ESN. So if they're doing both of those credentials, those candidates would choose the ESN TPA. Is that correct?
That is a very good question. And I want to draw your attention back to April of 2022, when I presented the item to the commissioners with regard to one TPA requirement. Remember that in April, the commissioners decided that only one TPA would be required over the course of the candidate's career, depending on whether they were pursuing concurrent credentials or subsequent credentials. In that particular instance that has been mentioned in the question, Anne, it really is a joint decision between the candidate and the program. You need to look at the candidate's placement, also talk about professional goals to determine what would be the best assessment for that candidate to complete. If they are pursuing both credentials, but yet they are in an MMSN placement, then my guess would be probably they would want to do the MMSN placement, because they may not have access to students who would working with an ESN setting. So really that is something that they need to determine based on a conversation between the candidate and the program.
Perfect. And that makes sense. There was another follow-up to the Ed TPA question, but how do we start the Ed TPA if it's not available or approved by CTC?
That is a question I cannot answer. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to put into the chat now, Anne, is a link to the field test materials, as well as a link to the program guide for the Ed Specialist CalTPA that you can access. It also has recordings on that will also help you with some of the webinar transitions that we provided as well. And that is in the chat.
And when we send out the recording to this, we'll make sure that that website link is included as well in that email. So
sure, it takes you to a Google folder. And in that Google folder, I will show you what is available. And it is all these different operational materials that we have. It has the assessment guides. So for both cycle 1 and cycle 2, MMSN and ESN. So it has the directions, the rubrics, and the glossary. Remember that they are the field test materials. However, you can use them for planning purposes. It also has an annotated bibliography contained in there as well. It has the templates that will support those candidate successes to help the candidates as they're planning. It has the Ed Specialist CalTPA candidate checklist, which is a great document that provides backwards mapping for how you can work with candidates on the Ed Specialist CalTPA. It has a program guide that again is in draft format. It is not the same as the general education CalTPA program guide because it has very unique pieces of information that apply to Ed Specialist candidates. One that I can think of right now is the section on working with students who are identified as an English learner, as well as having a disability, and how to work with students who are identified as both an English learner and a student with disability. We will be creating tutorials for technical support that will be coming in the fall. And also our candidate customer support is coming fall 2022. However, I will go into items that we currently have that are being offered as part of our support with programs as they transition to utilizing and implementing the TPA. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what would change and not change for the test materials for preparation for both MMSN and ESN. What will not change are the essential questions in the rubrics And I'm going to be showing you a rubric in a little bit, but those essential questions are not going to change. The rubric levels, we have 5 different levels for the rubrics. Again, those will not change. The number of cycles, there will still only be 2 cycles. And then the requirements for each step in the instructional cycle, those will not change. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that as you're using the field test materials for your planning purposes, that you can count on those items not changing. The essential questions in the rubric levels, the number of cycles, and then the requirements. What may change are prompts in the instructional guides. And what I mean by that is information to the candidates that is important as they are creating their responses to the instructions. I'll give you an example. As I was reviewing it today for our operational administration, we had a piece of information that we had brought over from the general education CalTPA that talked about that students needed to be seen and heard. Well, we could have an issue with that. I'm just going to go to gallery view for a moment. If you're working with students who are nonverbal or non-communicative, there could be an issue with that. So we had to make sure that we clarified that what would be acceptable for working with students who are non-communicative or nonverbal by using sign language, using an AAC device, or perhaps prompt boards where students could point. So it's those types of clarifications that we will be providing that will allow for more understanding when students are working, when candidates are working with students with a variety of different needs. But again, that doesn't change what the candidate has to do. It just clarifies what is important in a particular setting. Sorry, I just had to share my screen so I could provide that information. Also, what may change, the templates could slightly change just based on certain information that could be available. And then also the glossary could change. For example, we just added a definition for the glossary that talks about generalization in terms of higher order thinking skills. We also added information in the glossary with regard to high leverage practices so that information is explained as well. So some of the key design features, I'm just going to go through this at a high level because I know many of you have already seen it. Again, this came from the design team, the idea of working with all students who are on an IEP. The assessment design standards require that candidates work with a student who is an English learner or working with a student for whom listening, speaking, writing, or reading do pose a issue for the student. Students with an academic, physical, and/or behavioral need who also may be receiving related services related to that particular disability. And then also underserved students or students who may have experienced trauma either inside or outside of school. It looks at asset-based content-specific pedagogy and either literacy and mathematics. The idea is that there is formative feedback to candidates and programs when they complete one cycle before completing another. It is centrally scored by assessors who do retain the same credential as the area that is being assessed. It is meant that the video of teaching is practiced, it is directed and annotated, and is meant to be a natural harvest of evidence of what the candidate is actually doing in the classroom. Continuing on, remember the task force report called for educational technology to be embedded into instructional practice. There is also the opportunity for candidates to provide integrated instruction that supports itself within literacy and mathematics lessons. So if a candidate is working with science, for example, a way for them to infuse literacy and or math into that particular content area. There is also the opportunity for integrated instruction that supports functional and or life skills for our students who are needing additional supports in those areas. One of the very big design features that the design team was very adamant about was coordinating and or collaborating with instructional support personnel in planning lessons, and then in also working with students. The design team felt that in some cases there are more paras or other adults in the room than there are students, and so therefore there needed to be opportunities for candidates to demonstrate how they work with a variety of different support personnel. There's a focus on academic language and or communication development and how it relates to those developmentally appropriate or age appropriate higher order thinking, and looking at both classroom and non-classroom instructional contexts, knowing that candidates could be working with a variety of different students who are not in a traditional classroom, but could also be in a non-classroom, such as a CBI or other type of situations, including an adult transition program. Remember, I said that there was equal emphasis on the teaching performance expectations for both universal and the credential specific. They are listed here under the 6 domains, and we have both universal and the credential specific. And then finally, the underlying theory of action that we have is coming straight from what was in the task force report, but also in the work of the design team. As you can see here, universal design for learning, looking at an asset-based approach, not looking at things from a deficit mindset, but instead what students bring to the classroom as they are beginning their studies. What is the role of English language development in lesson planning and delivery? Looking at how students have access to higher order thinking based on their age and or developmentally appropriate levels. Looking at that academic language development and or communication development, how they facilitate instructional support personnel, how they look at modeling and metacognition and scaffolding to help students have adaptations in order to reach content-specific learning. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment and Ann, see, are there any other questions or anything that's come up in the chat, or if someone would like to raise their hand and ask a question?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Oh, I see a hand. Diana, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yes, thank you, James. Earlier, we were talking about EdSped CalTPA, and if a candidate was coming in with MMSN as well as ESN, do they take both TPAs? So my question would then be, if a candidate comes into the program and they have a clear multiple subjects credential or single subjects and they have successfully passed TPA, do they need to take the EdSped TPA? Is that a CTC requirement or?
Again, based on the item that I had presented in April, no, they would not take another TPA. If they have satisfied that requirement, they do not take another TPA. And incidentally, those regulations were accepted by the Office of Administrative Law on May 31st. So they have been codified. And so that is now part of the regulations for credentials. So yes, the requirement is only one TPA, but as a reminder, we do have candidates who may have earned a clear credential prior to a TPA requirement. They would not have to take one either because they have a clear credential and they have demonstrated that obviously if they have a clear and they're coming back after a while, they would not be held to the TPA requirement. The only situation in which they would have to take a TPA is, let's say they earned an old, I shouldn't say old because it's not old yet, it'll be old in what, 12 hours, mild, moderate, or a mod severe credential, and they didn't take a TPA, and let's say it's still in a preliminary state, and they say, oh, I want to add multiple subject. Let's say that. They would have to take a TPA because they didn't, they still have a preliminary. So in some cases, they may want to clear that credential first before adding another credential, just as a thought. So they would have a clear and wouldn't have to take the teaching performance assessment.
I do have a question in the chat. Is it advised that the TPA is spread out throughout the arc of the entire program or primarily done during the 400 hours of student teaching?
I would, okay, this is James Webb. If I were a program coordinator, just my personal feeling is I would actually start introducing some of the tasks early. For example, in cycle 1, where they have to start thinking about looking at their caseloads, determining how they, how do they want to work with their students, looking at a variety of different disabilities, starting to think about lesson planning, starting to really think about some of those preliminary ideas that they could take. Certainly would be a way for them to get some entry-level information. Also looking at the rubrics of what is required, whether it's the Ed TPA or the Ed Specialist CalTPA, to say, okay, what are you going to be asked to do? What are in those essential questions? What do you need to demonstrate? But then obviously to complete the performance assessment, you have to have students in front of you. So the actual video recording and those other tasks that are involved with that would be when you are within that 400 hours. If you have a candidate who is an intern, obviously they're going to have kids from day 1. So, they could begin when they're ready. My initial request would be get candidates to start video recording as soon as they can, so that students are comfortable with it, the candidate is comfortable with it. When I did my national board, I can't tell you how many times I video recorded before I actually had the one that I submitted, because you want the kids to get to a point where the video camera is just another piece of furniture. Because if they wait and video record and they haven't practiced, guess what happens? The kids think they're on TV and not the candidate. So that would just be something that I would want you to have your candidate start immediately, so that they get used to that particular aspect of the performance assessment.
Good advice. No more questions in the chat.
Actually, I see Diana has her hand up again.
I do, and I'll just share it. If I have that TPA as a multiple subjects teacher, have I had experience with students and had to document students with IEPs and special needs? Is that included in that particular TPA?
Well, I think, Diana, to answer your question, I think we have to look at what the objective of a performance assessment is, which is to document teaching. And so the idea is, and when I presented the item to the commission in April, part of what my rationale was is that if you have documented effective and competent teaching in a performance assessment, we would hope that there would be a professional transfer of skills from one area to another, and that it would be the program that fills in the important areas around the IEP, around looking at the requirements of accommodations, that would then supplement the candidate's ability to understand how to approach different instructional contexts. I mean, to speak for myself, my credential area was in secondary English. I got another credential in social studies, but I applied what I had from one area to another because I had already documented and demonstrated my ability to teach. And that's really what that TPA is documenting. Does that help with that question? Okay, great. Okay, Anne, any others before I move forward?
Nope, we're still good to move on.
Okay, and is this pace working for everyone? I just want to make, I know I'm stopping. I just know that there's probably so many questions. Okay. All right, so what I wanted to do is to show you a little bit about how the application of assessment works with the candidate submissions. So what I wanted to do is kind of walk you through as if you are an assessor for the Ed Specialist CalTPA. So one of the first things, and this is what I would also recommend, that when you are introducing the idea of having candidates look at the rubrics, how you can help prepare them. So the first thing you want to do is to take a look at what is the essential question. In essence, what is the candidate being asked to do in this particular area of the rubric? So in this particular one, which is rubric 1.6, which is the step 2, again, remember that in step 2, the candidates are teaching and video recording themselves with their students. So the essential question asks, how does the candidate actively engage students in deep learning of content, monitor or informally assess their understanding, and explain to students next steps for learning? And so we always start with the essential question. And what I have heard from other programs is that they are starting to infuse the essential questions into their course syllabi and other areas if they are using the Ed Specialist CalTPA, so that these essential questions are always in the mindset of the candidates. And so what I like to do when I'm training assessors is say, okay, what are the active verbs that candidates are being asked to do? So we see actively engage students, monitor or informally assess their understanding, and explain next steps for learning. So when you take a moment to unpack this question, candidates are engaging students, monitoring their understanding, and explaining next steps for learning. And so I've taken a question and broken it down to 3 particular areas. The next thing you do is look at level 3. And so you see the purple arrow at the top of level 3, and we have what we call 3 constructs, or 3 particular behaviors that would document that the candidate has met this particular level. So the first one says candidates instruction and informal assessment requires students to actively engage in higher order thinking about content. So the candidate needs to show how they are helping students in engaging in those higher order thinking skills or deep learning. Again, remember, age and or developmentally appropriate. Second thing, candidate monitors student learning to check for understanding throughout the lesson. Okay, that ties right back to my essential question. And then finally, how does the candidate explain next steps for learning? So in these 3 areas, remember we identified engaging students, assessing their understanding, and explaining next steps for learning. So they're all 3 in those level 3 constructs. The next thing we do is we say, okay, what are you going to show as your source of evidence? What will you provide to say, hey, I did this? Well, in this particular rubric, the 3 annotated video clips. And so across those 3 annotated video clips, if the candidate has evidence for those 3 constructs, they then have met level 3. And then finally, you'll see here are the TPEs that are measured. So when you see the first row, TPEs and elements, those apply to the universal TPEs. So you can see what is identified. And then in the second row, we have the MMS and TPEs and elements, and they are identified as well. So I wanted to just walk you through that this is something that if you are utilizing or you are using the Ed Specialist CalTPA, for example, for your performance assessment, how you could lead your candidates through how to break down and understand the rubrics. It's effective backwards mapping. When I was in the classroom, I always started with my rubrics when I was providing an assessment to my students so that we could look at, all right, what do you have to demonstrate? And then what is it ultimately going to look like? So I wanted to just show you the comparison. As I had said before, the main comparison between the MMSN and ESN is that in step 2 of both cycle 1 and cycle 2, MMSN candidates will video record either a whole class or a small learning group. For ESN, however, the candidate does have the opportunity in step 2 to video record a whole class, a small learning group, or an individual student. This was a result of both in the pilot and the field test, the need for candidates to work with one student because of their caseload and or their assignment. In some cases, we had ESN candidates with that who were in an itinerant situation, and so they needed to demonstrate how they could work with an individual student. And in the ESN step 2, certain video segments have been extended by an additional 2 minutes. So instead of 5 minutes, they will have 7 minutes in which they can show how they are working with students. And so that is really the main difference between MMSN and ESN for the purposes of understanding where they slightly diverge. So with that, I am going to take any questions, Anne, that may have come up from participants, and also the opportunity for folks to unmute themselves or raise their hand and unmute if they have any questions.
Hi, James. My internet has been going in and out. So if you asked if I was monitoring things, I've been trying to get back online.
Oh, okay. Anne, would you like me to jump in there?
Yes, if there are questions in the chat, I'm not.
Okay, so there was one that came in that you had mentioned 3 students for cycle 1. Is this the candidate doing a lesson for 3 individual students, like in 1-to-1, or doing a lesson with a small group with 3 students? I think you kind of were talking about the numbers there before we just broke, so maybe that goes along with, this question goes along with that.
Right, no, that's a good question. And so yes, the candidate would identify 3 focus students, but remember, it's 3 focus students from their caseload, not from their class. And so the candidate is only doing 1 lesson in cycle 1. And if it's an ESN, if it's the ESN Ed Specialist CalTPA, and they're only able to work with 1 student because of their assignment, then they would just work, they would teach the lesson, but they would work with 1 student, but they would still show how in the planning, how they would differentiate for a student with an English language need, a student with related services, and then also a student with perhaps a area for trauma.
Okay, and then thank you. So then there are some follow-up questions, but the lesson can be for the class with a focus on the 3 focus students. Is that
yes,
correct?
that is
Okay.
correct.
And then someone asked about how about the same question with MMSN?
So MMSN would MMSN in step 2 must work with either a small learning group or a whole class. So it could be their 3 focus students that they could work with, or it could be if they are in a situation, for example, if they are in a self-contained English class, for example, that they could work with the English class or science. It's at the secondary level.
And if I could add my own question to that. So when you're saying self-contained, are you talking about a self-contained special ed class, or are you talking about a general ed? Because we have so many of our folks working, like in a co-teaching situation? in
Sure.
general?
No, it could be either or. Because we, in looking at field test submissions, we did have a number of candidates who were in a general education classroom, and they were co-teaching or
Mhm.
co-facilitating with either their mentor teacher or with the general education teacher. And so still, remember what I said when I answered the question to Deborah earlier, it's about documenting and demonstrating teaching. And so, those, when we looked at that rubric before, engaging students, monitoring, and explaining next steps for learning, that could be, with any group with whom you're working, whether it's with a class of co-taught with gen ed or in a self-contained special ed.
Okay, thank you.
Or Diana, I'm sorry, Diana, I got your name wrong.
My question goes back to the diagram you showed earlier, and that was the common trunk. And then it branches off.
Mhm.
Is there information on what the common trunk, how it's defined? Is there information available for that so that we're coming from the same platform? Or is it just?
Sure. And I can find this as once I've ended the slide presentation, Diana, but there is a document that was prepared by William Hattrick and Sarah Solari, who are the consultants with the Ed Specialist programs. And they actually did a it's a crosswalk between the universal TPEs and the credential specific, so that you could see where there is alignment between the universal and the credential specific. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, it's just nice to not make an assumption. Oh, I know what a common trunk is, but my
Right.
mindset is coming from special education.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to that, and then that way you can access that document.
Wonderful. Thanks, James.
Or I think it's already been put in there. Perfect. I love this community. Everybody's supporting each other.
So James, Kimya has is raising her hand, please.
Okay.
I was wondering, I also found the link for the comparison chart for the M. Would that be helpful in this situation, or is that something different? Because I know they created the MMSN TPE comparison chart.
Yeah, I'd have to take a look at that one to know.
Okay, I put the URL in the chat just in case if that is.
Okay. Yeah, because see, some of the MMSN, or excuse me, some of the ESN TPEs are branched off from the MMSN TPEs. So sometimes when you look in the program requirements, you'll see some that are a little bit more, but that's because they come from the MMSN. And so that's why, now with the new credential structures, it's very easy for a candidate to work on both MMSN and ESN. And I know some programs are going to be offering both of them because there is so much crossover among the standards.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, Amber is asking. Amber, do you want to ask your question, or I'll read your comment? It seems the common trunk is represented in the universal elements required of all candidates.
That
Right.
is correct. Yes.
Okay.
And then I saw a question, Virginia, if you don't mind, from Yvonne. She says a previous slide said to submit 3 video clips. Yes, that is correct. But if a candidate is doing small group, then do they submit 1 video clip? No, they would still submit 3 video clips because the 3 video clips are assessing different TPEs. So the first video clip, and I'm going to speak specifically to cycle 1, the first video clip is looking at how a candidate establishes a effective classroom environment, looking at how they arrange furniture, or other considerations for medically fragile students. The second video clip is looking at the way that they are presenting instruction through a variety of different instructional strategies and also implementing adaptations. And then the third video clip is looking at how they are closing the lesson and also providing those next steps for learning. So it is assessing different teaching behaviors across those 3 video clips.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, well, I think I can go ahead and continue. Anne, are you still there? Or
I'm
did you
still
leave us?
here, and I think my connection is hanging on now. So
Okay, because I'm going to be calling on you in just a few moments, because now we're getting into scoring. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And the reason I'm recognizing Anne and also David Rago, I see, is in here as well. So please forgive me if you were on our standard setting panel and I didn't recognize you. But these individuals were part of the standard setting that I'm going to get into next, where we established and recommended a score recommendation to our MMSN and ESN. So after review in the standard setting, and if you'd like to get the whole explanation of this, I would invite you to look at the item that I presented 2 weeks ago. But in MMSN cycle 1, the passing score is what is highlighted here at 17. What we are doing is the committee recommended a passing standard of 19 points with only 1 score of 1 allowed. And we're applying what's called a standard error of measure for the first 2 years of a -1. So what that means is that candidates need to, in order to successfully, quote unquote, pass MMSN, they will need to earn a score of 17 across the 8 rubrics for cycle 1. In cycle 2, remember that there in cycle 2, there is 1 more rubric, so it's slightly higher. A passing standard of 21 points was recommended with only 1 score of 1 allowed, and apply a standard error of measure of -1, resulting in a passing score of 19. So for the first 2 years of the MMSN Ed Specialist CalTPA, cycle 1, a total score of 17 points is required. And for cycle 2, a total score of 19 points is required. David, are you still with us? David Rago?
Yes, I am.
Would you, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Would you like to share with the participants why we had to apply the standard error of measure and what that process looked like?
Sure. So it was a big discussion about based on scores from the field tests and where trends were and what was happening based on performance and submissions that were coming in from the field test. So there was some discussion about the points and different conditions, and so there was the decision or the discussion about allowing for some differences based on where some of the submissions were falling in terms of the scores. So a lot of it was about where the submissions were and where the candidates were in the groups. And so there was an idea of where to kind of leave some errors, leave some room for students to not do well in one area, but still be able to overall meet all the constructs in the rubrics.
Right. No, very good. Thank you, David. The other thing I'd like to add to that is that even though we have over 80 programs, MMSN programs, we only had 25 programs participate. So we didn't have the robust numbers that we would have had, like, for example, in the redesign of the CalTPA. So what we had to do is we had to say, okay, based on what we have, here's where we think it is. The committee recommended 19 and 21, which is exactly like the Gen Ed CalTPA. But because we had a lower set of submissions come in, we applied that standard error of measure, which is a common term in the world of assessment, to say, okay, you know what? We don't know how people, did they take this seriously? Did the programs actually let them, replace this with another paper, whatever? So we applied the standard error of measure to say, okay, based on all of these things, we're going to give candidates, we're going to err on the side of the candidate and lower it by those 2 points, which is the -1. So that's why cycle 1 is a 17 and cycle 2 is a 19. However, the standard setting panel agreed. And when we looked at the statistical data that said, okay, they may only get one score of 1 on a rubric and still be able to demonstrate this particular score. And so I wanted David to explain that this was not something that we did. This was based on what recommendations were provided to us by the group who had convened. So when we take a look at the ESN, you'll see same thing. We have a passing standard of 19, but we applied a standard error of measure of -1.5 with no side condition. So for ESN cycle 1, it is a combined score of 15. In cycle 2, there was a passing standard recommended of 20, and we applied a standard error of measure of -1.5, which resulted in a combined score of 17 with no side conditions. And do you mind unmuting and kind of explaining that, because you were with the ESN group?
Right. Yeah. Again, because of the we didn't have necessarily the range of the different institutions that will be credentialing, and then the lower number of ESN students, we wanted to make sure that we were kind of covering where students would actually be when everybody started focusing on that. And so we didn't have that. We also didn't decide to have that side condition of no more than a 1, just given the submissions that we were able to look at and where they were coming down. We felt that even without that side condition, that with that passing score of 19, and then of course that standard of error of measurement being factored in, that would enable ESN students to show that they had met this performance expectation.
Right, very good, thank you. And so ESN was slightly lower than MMSN, so that's why you're seeing a higher standard error of measure being applied with no side conditions. And so with that, because I know that this was very dense, we'll take some questions, and I'm actually going to take us out of the presentation and into gallery mode so that I can see everyone. I always hide my self view. I read in that Stanford article that you should do that because it does help you. But anyway, I wanted to take us back into gallery mode. And so any questions or other items that have come up? I saw the chat populate a little bit.
There was a question of how many rubrics in cycle 2.
Very good. Cycle 2 has 9 rubrics. Cycle 1 has 8 rubrics.
Okay.
Most of the comments are on how helpful this is. Mary, one person had a question about who would be able to answer more questions on the Ed TPA, and I just put a note in the chat that at the end of August, so after the commission has had the opportunity to approve the Ed TPA, we will be having another community of practice meeting just like this with someone who is a specialist on the Ed TPA who will be able to answer specific questions on that
Right.
assessment.
Perfect.
I also have a question, James. Let's see here. I don't know if you can see my hand.
Yes.
Okay, and excuse me. From my understanding, there is a certain level of support that is allowable and good, and we, to provide to our candidates. And then there's a certain level that's not allowed. And so I'm sure there's not like a dividing line, but could you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, in the link that I gave to you earlier with the materials, you'll see that there is a document in the program guide, and it does talk about acceptable versus unacceptable support.
Okay.
Essentially, acceptable support is anything that we would allow in our classrooms with our own students. Peer review, coaching by the mentor teacher, coaching by the university supervisor, looking at those essential questions. That's what I would use. So if you're, for example, if a mentor teacher is watching a video with a candidate, they can ask those questions. So tell me, how did you engage the students in higher order thinking? Where's the place where you explain the next steps for learning? You see, and then they're telling me what would be. That's all forms of acceptable support.
Okay.
And in fact, that's what's going to make this truly be a quality experience. It's the same thing that I experienced in my national boards. We met for a year with other folks getting the same credential or the same authorization, and we reviewed each other's work. We became very, very close because, we were just looking at our work. This is what would be unacceptable. So Virginia, a student comes to you and says, hey, can you take a look at what I've written for step 1? And you go through it and say, yep, nope, change this. Yeah, they're not going to like this. You need to use this word. And so now what you're doing is you're rewriting their submission instead of coaching them.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, hey, in the rubric, it states that you need to use an asset-based approach in explaining about your students. Show me where you've done that here, because they've gone from a deficit mindset where they're saying kids just can't do anything, but you're letting them, oh, well, I don't have it. Well, remember the rubric says, and then that way you're providing support, but you're going to turn it back to them to add that information. The other unacceptable support is you don't want to score it. You don't want to say, oh, this is going to get a 2. And here's why it's going to get a 2. Because then what you're doing is you are taking on the role of an assessor in a way that would not be appropriate to what is in the performance assessment. And then, of course, the last piece of unacceptable support, which I know you would not allow in your classes anyway, is to say, here's a bank of submissions, go find one and turn it in.
Ooh, right. We would not.
No, because it's important to remember to let the candidates know that they will sign an attestation when they upload their submissions that it is their original work and that they are attesting that it is their work and their work alone. And just like turnitin.com, which I loved when I was in the classroom, it does check against other submissions to ensure that it is the candidate's own work. And if they do violate that policy, they're putting their credential on the line.
Mm-hmm. I could see a situation though where we, as faculty, might want to assign some of these things, but we can't, and perhaps give a grade to it. But then that would imply to them probably that, oh, this is good or not so good or things like that. So I have to think more about maybe those would be pass, no pass or something like that.
Well, what I might do, Anne or others who participated in the field test, if you might want to share what you did, because you field tested the materials. Do you have anything of what you did?
one of the things I did was go religiously to your open office hours to ask questions. So I don't know if you'll be doing those again, but that was.
Oh no, I am on all summer and no one showed up last Friday. So come and visit with me because we are all in the mind frame of technical assistance to help all programs transition.
So first I'm going to give a plug for that because I found that to be one of the most helpful things, particularly when I had questions from candidates that I was like, that's a good question, I'm not sure. I could take it to those open office hours and get a really good answer. We did a lot of peer work where peers would review each other's work so they could give each other feedback. And then something that I kind of came to as part of the things that I did was that if I'm asking questions, it always felt like that was an acceptable form of coaching. And if I was making statements or telling that I was, either maybe not being appropriate or getting a little closer to that line than I wanted to be, kind of generally. So I would refer to those essential questions. I would refer to the rubric, but when I would talk about it, I would do it in more of a asking questions sort of way. And then we actually had them participate in the field test through their seminar class. So it was just in that class where we tried to do a lot of practicing. As we're building our new program, we're actually trying to create assignments where they can kind of practice videotaping, practice annotating videos around those areas where they're not actually doing it for the CalTPA. So we maybe can give a little more feedback but also provide some of that coaching opportunities before they actually get to the test itself.
Right. And Anne, one thing that you identified that I really appreciate is the questioning and the coaching. And as we know, as mentors, which I'm sure all of us have filled this role, the moment we start telling a candidate, a new teacher or a candidate, we've now said, okay, you're going to do what I say because I know it all. But we know that that's not effective coaching. That's not the work of, Wellman and Lipton in cognitive coaching. We always want to put it back on them and say, what would you do? How might you change this? And so it really allows for that dialogue to occur in which we would be supportive of that. So really, I think, Virginia, back to your point, just wanted to give you an idea. And there are David participated in it. There's some other folks in this room, and I would call on your community of practice to really talk about what were some effective strategies that worked, and then what might you want to do as you're looking ahead to the future. And remember, you have, depending on whether they do the EdTPA or the CalTPA, you have colleagues in your general education departments who could definitely provide you with some feedback and some other ideas to think about as well.
Yes.
We have a comment too from Stephanie, who I'm assuming, based on her comment, that she participated in the field test, although I'm not positive. We assign draft templates in class, read them, and use questions, the Socratic questioning, to help candidates identify what they can address or adjust, then give credit for submitting the draft. Credit is not for correct, incorrect answers. And ND and you did do the field test, yes.
Yes, they did. So there again, there's another way to encourage that participation and also being able to help candidates work through the process. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, so I do want to get to the last few items because they are the ones that Anne was mentioning, ways that we can provide support. For the Ed Specialist CalTPA, we do have weekly office hours. They're every Friday from 10 to 10:30. That link is in the PSD e-news. It is in the performance assessment area, and so you can find that there. As I mentioned before, I will be hosting the operational materials orientation on August 31st. I will do one session for MMSN and another session for ESN. We invite you, if you have not already registered for the Meredith Fellows Implementation Conference for Performance Assessment. This is for all performance assessments that are sponsored by the commission. So that would be the CalTPA, the EdTPA, and FAST, which is the Fresno Assessment for Student Teachers. That is going to be held on September 16th through the 17th. And there are going to be breakout sessions. It will be offered online. So it is something that we highly recommend, regardless of the performance assessment model you adopt. And also know that it is free, which of course is one of our favorite things. I will be having the kickoff webinar on October 5th for both MMSN and ESN. You'll see that there is a link for a coordinator newsletter. If you are not already subscribed, I would recommend subscribing to this, and I can put this into the chat as we start to close our meeting. We will be offering our Digging Deeper series again this year for all of the commission-sponsored performance assessments, including the early childhood education CalTPA that we are ending our pilot with. There will be a session in fall, winter, and spring. And then we are hopefully with the ability in working with the California Department of Public Health, and if we can offer in-person faculty workshops while maintaining safety and the health of our participants, we would like to begin those in the fall of 2022 at different places around the state. As I mentioned, the program guide is in those materials that I sent to you via the bit.ly. The program guide I would strongly recommend taking a look at. It is written for faculty to provide resources and information for the assessment materials. These are the different folks for whom the program guide audience could be particularly effective. And so really it's anybody who is supporting a candidate as they are participating in the performance assessment. The last thing I'd like to do is to put a plug in for those of you who are interested in becoming an assessor. The requirements are here. You have to meet both of them. And so it's not an either or, but it is an both requirements have to be met for assessor for the Ed Specialist CalTPA. Some of the participants who are in this session I have noticed have been assessors for both MMSN and ESN. And so thank you, and I hope you continue your work with us. The tentative assessor training, the dates will be determined probably in January of 2023. We don't have our first submission deadline. We're anticipating it'll be towards the end of December of 2022, but that is a tentative date. We do ask that you plan for a 2 to 3 day session for each credential area. The scoring will be conducted online, and then if you are participating in a assessor role, you are compensated for your time. Just as a reminder, the education specialist program coordinator list, I will put in the chat in just a moment. The other piece of information is that if you have any TPA questions, you can always email this address at CTC. If they are program questions, you can email the special ed at CTC, and that mailbox is monitored by William and Sarah. And then finally, here are additional supports that we have. I've gone into a number of them, but the other thing that I'd like to direct your attention to is our YouTube channel. We do have a Ed Specialist CalTPA playlist that we would highly recommend that you access so that you can get information on past webinars as well as future ones. And so with that, because we are right at 1 o'clock, again, I apologize. Virginia, I told you I had a full 90 minutes.
Yes, and you are right to the minute. James, we want, am I on mute? Let me see here.
Nope, we can hear you.
Okay. We want to thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and for your clarity and for all the information and for your kindness in answering all our questions. We're going to make sure that the chat is saved. If you can save it on your own Zoom link, go ahead and do that, of course, and you'll have all the links. And as Ann mentioned earlier, the recording will be available. It takes us a little while to do the transfer to to the format that we need to share with you, but it will be available as well. And so that's the end of our COP for number 2. I love that James suggested that we follow up in the spirit of a community of practice with ideas that we're already developing in our own programs. So we'll explore that a little bit with you all.
And Virginia, just to let you know, I did put the newsletter to sign up for that. I put that in there twice. I'll put it in again just so people have it. But if you want to put it in one of your follow-up emails to your participants, you can do that as well.
Very good. And also how to get to PSD News in case they don't know, in case people don't have that link.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. James, this was fantastic. I know it's been something that's been on a lot of people's minds. There's many, many thank yous in the chat. Hopefully you can see that.
Just know that you're not by yourself. I am here to help you. We are here to make sure you feel supported. And so you never are wasting my time by asking me a question. And I'll tell you, I could talk about this for days. So you can indulge my nerdy side and I'll be more than happy to help you.
And I can confirm you are both an amazing nerd and an amazing support in that nerdiness. So it's very, very appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful rest of the summer. And thank you again to James, and good wishes to all of you as you launching your programs.